Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this edition of Benchmark, continuing our focus on education, we talk to Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike, the former Deputy Chairperson of the Centre for Poverty Analysis, for her perspective on some key issues pertaining to Sri Lanka's education sector. Next, Nielsen's Managing Director Sharang Pant expands on the LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index sliding to a post-war low. And we wrap up the show with LMD's columnist Shiran Fernando, who gives us his take on Sri Lanka's macro outlook. That's the lineup for Benchmark.
Hello and welcome to Benchmark, the Big Picture Business Program. I'm Savitri Rodrigo. We are delighted to welcome back to our program Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike, the former Deputy Chairperson of the Centre for Poverty Analysis. In fact, she just stepped down as the Deputy Chairman, and to offer her perspective on some key issues pertaining to Sri Lanka's education sector. Ahead in the program, we will be touching on topics as to what constitutes a quality education and also Sri Lanka's progress towards achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals in education, among others. Anila, welcome and good to have you on the show.
Thank you.
As a start off, what constitutes a good education in the 21st century?
I'll have to give you a little background before my thinking on the matter before that. I think the first thing we have to recognize in the 21st century is that knowledge is now growing exponentially. Forget about, technological advancement, medical advances. If you look at how history and geography have changed over the last 30 years. And children still have only 12 years for their primary and secondary education. So that's one aspect to remember, the volume of information that's available. The second thing is that because of technological advancement, information is very readily available. So I think the first thing to remember is that now we need to teach children how to analyze more than how to store knowledge in their heads, because the knowledge is there. We need to teach them what to access, where to go, how to use it. So basically we have to move away from rote learning to a much more focus on analytical thinking. That's one side in terms of the knowledge. The second thing I think in today's world is that some of the more advanced education systems, say in the Scandinavian countries, they have recognized that you have to focus a great deal more on emotional quotient, EQ, not necessarily only on IQ. So then you need to ensure that the education system allows you co-curricular activities, where children will learn to work together, teamwork, and also to focus on collaborate rather than compete, because ultimately you can optimize on whatever you can learn if you can work together rather than working against each other. And unfortunately today's world teaches you more to compete than to collaborate. And I think one has to, in today's world, allow the education system should allow each individual to achieve their potential, and that need not necessarily be through the academic stream, vocational stream, creative arts. If you want to have a career through sports, today, the world is your oyster. Today's world gives you a sense of entitlement. Every parent thinks their child is going to be the best doctor, or has the best voice in the world, or is the best athlete. So you have, everybody is asked to participate, that's fine. But at some point, children must be mature enough, people must be mature enough to know what their limitations are. If you can't sing in tune, you can't be in a school choir. So this kind of, I think it's called intrapersonal awareness, where you have to recognize your own limitations, understand your own strengths, and not think you can be all things to all people.
You've opened up a whole plethora of question areas for me, but you brought up something that is very important at this point of time: rote learning. we are a country that has just worked on rote-driven education. At this point of time, does Sri Lanka's system provide for that 21st century education you were just talking about?
Not really. I think there have been efforts over the last 20-30 years to move in that direction, but unfortunately there hasn't been consistency in how it has been approached. So I mean, if you want to look at the positives of the Sri Lankan education, I think we still have to be extremely grateful that through the free education system, any child who with ability and effort can, through the education system, get to the top of their profession. That opportunity is there. Secondly, I think in Sri Lanka, and I think you're going to be asking me this again when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality in education. In fact, I was looking at the last school census. You find that other than in primary school, actually there are more girls than boys in the secondary and tertiary, in the secondary school system. So the gender equality is there. Then we also have, and I'll go into the negatives of that later if you'll allow me, a scholarship system that will allow children with ability to move to schools where the facilities are much better. And the exam system is streamlined, and you do have an organized structure where you have the, within districts education zones, then you have education divisions. So there is an administrative structure on paper.
Right, you mentioned the grade 5 scholarship examination. Yeah. You also mentioned, through that, then we also have the district quota system. Yeah. Now, these are all inconsistencies as far as I can see, when you look at the whole education system. What's your opinion about this?
Okay. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the school infrastructure. Now, I mentioned the administrative system, and I brought some information with me. One thing, again, a good thing about Sri Lanka is that we have a lot of statistical information. Every year, there is a school census conducted. You know how many schools, how many teachers, the type of school, the type of children, grade 1 admissions, etc., etc. So now we have a situation where we have, and I brought some statistics to share with you. Sri Lanka has about 10,000 schools, almost a few private and pirivenas, but mostly the government schools. And these 10,000 schools cater to about 4 million children, and there are 230,000 teachers. So I think it averages to about less than 20 children per teacher, which is fine. And most of these teachers are either graduate teachers or trained teachers. So that sounds very good on paper. But if you look at these 10,000 schools, there are about 50% of the schools, 5,000, are less than 200 kids. And some of these schools, I found that some of the schools have maybe one teacher, and in some schools there are 5 kids to a teacher, in other schools more than 50 kids to a teacher. The infrastructure needs to be looked at. Why are we having lots of schools at the two ends of the spectrum, either too many kids per teacher at over 50 kids a teacher, what can you teach? And the other end where there are some schools, one teacher per kid. So now one of the inconsistencies that I see is what you mentioned, the grade 5 scholarship exam. You had a situation where, because children didn't have access to the schools with the better facilities, you gave children who did well in the grade 5 scholarship exam an opportunity to go to a bigger school, maybe in a more urban area, where they could continue to study. Then you bring in huge disparities among the districts. You bring in a district quota system to compensate for the fact that some districts have much better facilities than others. So now what have you done? This kid who at the age of 5, 11 years old does exceptionally well, is taken out of their home situation, probably put into the hostel of the bigger school or in a boarding somewhere at a very young age. How many years later, from grade 5 to grade 13, 8 years later, that poor kid, the smart kid who got the scholarship, is now competing, having to get much higher marks than the kids who didn't do as well at the scholarship in his hometown. Then we have a situation where we are a multicultural, multiracial society. We have a problem where in the deep south there's one of the ethnic groups, in the north there's another, and they speak two different languages. To communicate with each other, we have finally made sense and had what is called the linked language courses. But it's useless having it on paper if you don't have people to teach the Sinhala children Tamil and the Tamil children Sinhalese. There's no point talking about it.
Okay, so let's continue this discussion after the break, Anila.
Okay.
Time for some messages from our sponsors. When we return, Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike provides some insight into improving access to tertiary education and also improving the collaboration between educational institutes and industries. So stay tuned.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
$8,500 done. 1,500 to go. Hoorah!
What on earth are you doing?
I'm making money.
You're crazy.
Crazy for money. 10,000 steps done. Who the man? I do it every single day. Show me the money.
So you run 10,000 steps every day, huh? You must be fit.
Some days I do 20,000. Hoorah!
Thank you for staying with Benchmark. We now return to our discussion with Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike, the former Deputy Chairperson of the Centre for Poverty Analysis, and she's currently a board member. Anila, something I was going to ask you before our break was, what exactly is the government's policy on private and tertiary education?
You ask me. I'd like to ask you the same question. I mean, this is true of the government's policy on a lot of things. It's not at all clear. I mean, I remember a time when the government did not allow private hospitals. And then very sensibly, for whatever reason, they allowed private hospitals to come in, and they ensured that those hospitals maintain the same standards that the country would like for curative health care, and they all come under the Ministry of Health, and private hospitals have opened up, while the government hospitals provide an excellent service. We do have budget deficit over several years. The country can't afford to expand the free services it provides. So now those who can afford it go to the private hospitals, the private labs to do the tests. Sometimes the government provides an excellent health service right out to the periphery, but you allow the private to go in parallel. my own position is that we should allow the same in for education. I mean, you go anywhere in the suburbs of Colombo, you go out, or within Colombo, the number of degree granting institutions that are affiliated to some good universities, some I think maybe even fly by night, but children are flocking there. And why? We have a free education, university education system in this country, and as I mentioned earlier, you know that a child who has ability and puts effort can get to the top of their profession. However, these are the statistics. Every year, about over 50%, last year, 2017, 60%, about I think 2 lakhs of kids or little more sit the A-level. 60% qualify. They pass the A-level, qualify to get into university. We have room for only less than 20%. So you have last year 160,000 children qualified to go into university, and the system will take in I think about 40. So what happens to these other 120,000 children?
How do you think we can actually improve access to tertiary education?
By having like the private hospitals, have a policy that says yes, so long as these satisfy our requirements, you standardize, allow them to come in. Of course, you have to think if they are charging fees, Sri Lanka also must get something out of it. And formalize and rationalize what is already happening. Now the government turns a blind eye, but these kids are all getting degrees, Royal Institute of, I mean so many, I don't want to mention one name only. And ensure that the standards are met and let the children who do well have an opportunity.
Again, talking about these degree granting institutions, parents, because of this desperation, would do anything or give anything just to get any old degree. Not necessarily something that's going to add value to the child. So how can collaboration between educational institutions and industries and the child's personal abilities be actually matched?
Well, some, if I've got your question right, some of our universities are actually doing that. You know, there was a time when the private sector was complaining, saying our children come out with degrees and the system is rote learning, they can't think or they don't have the soft skills. So many of the forward-thinking universities in Sri Lanka now have, I remember I told you I was mentoring for one of the universities, they have programs where they work with either mentoring where they get people who are willing to mentor and they send groups of children to work with them to show them what a work environment is like. When I was in the central bank, I did this for a few years. They also have programs where the private sector comes in and gives these children internships, where during their 3 or 4 year program, depending on the area of specialization, they will go and do an internship for anything from 3 to 6 months with a private company to learn what the corporate world is like. From a practical point of view, in this country, the labor market is short in every field. So, you know, if we are encouraging everybody to scrape their savings and send their children for degrees to some other part of the world because we are not willing to be open-minded and pragmatic and forward-thinking, then be ready to not have 80% of those children coming back.
So, as a final question, one of the things that I would love to ask you is, one of the UN SDGs is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. How would you assess Sri Lanka's progress?
Okay, let's go through. Equitable,
inclusive and equitable quality education.
So we have the inclusive because, as I said, with our 10,000 schools, there are schools everywhere. Children have the opportunity to move to the better facility schools. Gender equality, very important. So we have the inclusive. Equitable, not quite, because we need to address this infrastructure issue and make sure that in every part, children shouldn't have to come to Colombo or Kandy or Galle to have a school with all the facilities. On the quality education, we have all the problems I spoke about. Still, this move to continuous assessment is not as good as it should be. oppressive exam system. I mean, what happens if you're sick on the day of your O-levels or A-levels, This huge syllabuses, and I said it shouldn't be that way, because what I said right at the beginning, it's no longer about remembering, it's about accessing the education and accessing the knowledge and using it. So on the quality, I think we have some way to go. On the equitable, we have some way to go, but I think on inclusive and access, it's there. And vocation, we are still focusing very much on the white collar book learning kind of approach. Now, we need to recognize that the world has moved in a very different way, and there are opportunities in so many areas for people to have a good career, earn a living wage, and be happy without being a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or a engineer, and from that point of view, I think we need to encourage children not to all want to do A-levels and go into universities for the sake of the degree. We have, especially with these limitations of the number, if only 20% can get in, when they can be channeled into other areas which could be just as satisfying and just as exciting, so long as you get out of that mindset of wanting to do this book learning and recognizing where your talents are.
Thank you, Anila. It's been very educational for me too. So education was the topic we were discussing with the former Deputy Chairperson of the Center for Poverty Analysis, Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike today. On the other side, we have Anushan Selvaraja with more.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
Done. 1,500 to go. Hoorah!
What on earth are you doing?
I'm making money.
You're crazy.
Crazy for money. 10,000 steps done. Who the man? I do it every single day. Show me the money.
So you run 10,000 steps every day, huh? You must be fit.
Some days I do 20,000. Hoorah!
Welcome back to Benchmark. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. Now for a closer look at the latest on the LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index. Joining me is the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharang Pan. Welcome back to the show, Sharang. Now the BCI is going down again. What are the sensitivities behind this?
So Anushan, before we talk about the drop in BCI, we should also understand that there are some good things that are happening in the country. We talk about the second quarter GDP growth. It moved up to 3.7. higher than the 3.5 we saw in the previous quarter. If you look at the latest inflation number, they're also down to 2.5% at an overall level compared to last year. Food inflation in fact is at 0, while non-food is on the rise. So there is some good news which is impacting consumer confidence. So consumer confidence in fact went up from 41 to 50. The consumers are expecting prices to remain stable, therefore they are talking about increasing their consumption. Having said that, Yes, indeed, the BCI has dropped from 95 in the previous month to 87 in the month of September. This number is the lowest since April 2009. So almost after a gap of 9 to 10 years, the number has dropped below that particular level. We feel this drop is largely because of external factors. The media news that is around the Sri Lankan currency, it's being called out as one of the 7 currencies which is under risk at this particular stage. That is causing some bit of anxiety, impatience in the business community, which is why we see such a significant drop in the business confidence index.
So how do respondents view our business climate then?
They are worried. They're worried and they're talking about the economy first. So only about 5% of them say that the economy might improve in the next 12 months. Whereas 65% or 2 in 3 talk about it going down further from where it is right now. When it comes to their own businesses, the sentiments are still at a similar level compared to last month, which is still on the lower side. So only 18% of them feel that the business will grow in the next 3 months, or about 16% of them feel that the business will grow in the next 12 months. So sentiments are indeed down, and largely because of the overall economy.
What do they cite as being the most pressing business and national issues?
When it comes to business, it's still the high taxes which are called out by 100% of the respondents. That comes up at number 1. Following that is policy instability. So they are looking for better announcements, improvements in certain investment policies which will shore up the economic performance as such. That comes in second at around 60%, followed by the value of the rupee at 55%. National issues, it's again politics, corruption, and the education system. These are the top 3 that come up.
So based on all of this, Sharang, what would your projections be for the BCI?
Well, it all depends on which way the currency goes. Right now it's only one way, which is downwards, which is causing anxiety in the business community. The government is aiming to put in certain measures to control the fall of the rupee, whether it's to do with import curbs on vehicles or a few other initiatives. Depending on how successful these initiatives are, plus how they can rein in the inflation, that will determine which direction the business confidence or the consumer confidence takes. We don't expect the confidence levels to move up around 93, 94, not beyond that. It will be around that level.
Thank you very much for joining us, Sharang. That was the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharang Pant. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. Stay tuned.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
Welcome back to Benchmark. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. Now for a closer look at the latest on our economy. Joining me is economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Welcome back to the show, Shiran. Now, first, the Finance Ministry just brought in some new regulations for the import sector. Now, could you just elaborate on what they're trying to do with this?
Sure. So I think September has been very almost very difficult for the economy in terms of where the exchange rate has gone. Lots of pressures mounting both externally, and that highlights some of the internal vulnerabilities. And as a result of that, I think we've seen the rupee weakening about 4% in September. Total in the first 9 months about 10%. So significant level of volatility plus weakness in the backdrop of other countries also doing this. So one way I think, there are many ways to plug this. The more long-term thing is to have higher level of exports, higher level of FDI, and reduce the reliance on more debt-led inflows to balance your deficits. The other more short-term measure, which sometimes delivers more short-term results with sometimes more long-term gain, is some of these import restrictions. So I think this, beyond what we saw just a few days ago being implemented, at the start of the year as well, when you saw gold imports rising, there was restrictions put in April. That has sort of eased out the inflow or the imports of gold. Then you've seen, prior to the recent one, 100% margin requirement also put on importation of vehicles, and previous to that also you saw another one which called for a revision within a certain engine capacity category. So that is all, I think, targeting more of the import sectors, which is more under the control of the Treasury and the government. And some of them, I think, are more relevant ones, such as removal of certain permits and things like that, which fuels the import cycle as so. So the temporary removals of this may ease that. Whether this will have more long-term impacts in terms of how markets behave is yet to be determined. But I think this is all a reaction to shore up, because even in countries like India, they have been raising either the duty levels or putting more restrictions in the importation of goods. So we're seeing this across countries which are also facing similar pressures, and it's even on this reaction, it's not only Sri Lanka that's doing similar things.
So now, how is the recent exchange, the volatility in our exchange rate, how has it impacted our export sector?
The general expectation that it will be good for exports because they get a higher revenue earning, but a lot of these export companies are also very much import dependent. So if you look at even apparel, there's a whole amount of imports that come in, like cotton, yarn, things like that, which need to be imported as well. So it's not necessarily there will be, because of maybe a 10% weakness in the currency, exports will rise 10%. You don't have that level of this thing, but I think they'll be able to gain more earnings. It might be maybe more positive for remittances in the short term. You're also seeing associated with this rupee depreciation also the price of oil also rising, and that is now also past $80 a barrel. So that also might have an impact in terms of maybe remittances, more of it coming in with some of the more some of the more Middle Eastern countries doing better. So a mix of these reasons.
So based on what you have just said, Shiran, what are your expectations for the economy towards the end of the year?
So I think right now, especially given that the budget is due in about a month, I think all eyes will look at that, not in terms of, both in terms of where some of the numbers will be, in terms of the deficit numbers, whether we are actually moving towards what we've seen in the recent few years with higher revenue collections, as also deficit figures coming down, but more in terms of some of the principles in terms of the policy direction, whether it's consistent to what has been talked about, whether they are re-looking at maybe certain sectors which maybe needs galvanizing or regulation changes, because a lot of these sectors also have a lot of ease of doing business constraints which could be unlocked through policy documents such as the budget. So I think that will be the key expectation. But whatever we do domestically, I think will continue to be overshadowed by what goes on externally. This wave of emerging market volatility has been there for a prolonged amount of time relative to what we've had over the last few years. And if it doesn't turn around, I think then we probably have to get accustomed to this new norm of higher interest rates in global markets and dollar strengthening.
Thank you for joining us, Shiran.
Thank you.
That was economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Thank you for watching Benchmark, and we hope to see you again next time.